What comes next will alter everything. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung, your greatest and most beautiful journey is the one that leads you back to yourself. Subscribe to Carl Jung Philosophy and hit the like button. And let's walk that path together. Carl Jung observed a pattern so consistent across his decades of clinical practice that he came to regard it as one of the fundamental organizing laws of the human psyche. He borrowed a term from the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus and called it an antiadromia, the principle that when anything within the psyche reaches its absolute extreme, it transforms into its opposite. Not gradually, not through deliberate decision or careful planning suddenly, with a force and a totality that feels to the person experiencing it less like change and more like the complete dismantling of a reality they had mistaken for permanent. The principle of enantiodromia operates across every dimension of psychological life with a consistency that Jung found both remarkable and humbling. The person who has spent years accommodating everyone around them, suppressing their own needs, silencing their own instincts, making themselves smaller and more manageable in order to preserve the peace, arrives one day at a threshold they did not see approaching. And they suddenly find that they cannot tolerate one more request, one more imposition, one more violation of the self they have been quietly abandoning. Nothing in the external world changed, but internally the psyche reached its limit. The one-sidedness became so extreme that the opposite force, which had been building in the unconscious for years, accumulating pressure in the silence beneath conscious awareness, finally broke through. And what looked from the outside like a sudden collapse was actually the inevitable conclusion of a process that had been unfolding far beneath the visible surface for a very long time. This is what makes sudden transformation feel so shocking to the person experiencing it. The preparation happens entirely underground. Jung compared it to tectonic plates shifting in the deep strata beneath the Earth's surface. For years, sometimes for decades, nothing visible occurs. The landscape appears stable. Life proceeds in its familiar patterns. But pressure is gathering along fault lines that no instrument above ground can detect. And then the earthquake arrives, and everyone in the vicinity believes it came from nowhere. But it did not come from nowhere. It was building the entire time at a depth that ordinary awareness simply cannot reach. To reach. Your psyche operates according to precisely the same principle. The transformation that may be approaching in your life did not originate yesterday. It began years ago, perhaps many years ago, when your unconscious first registered the gap between who you were presenting to the world and who you actually are beneath the presentation. Every time you silenced an instinct because honoring it would have been inconvenient, your unconscious registered the suppression and stored the energy of it slowly. Every time you remained in a circumstance that violated something essential in you, the pressure along the fault lines increased. Every time you performed a version of yourself designed to keep others comfortable, while something authentic within you quietly contracted, another crack formed in the structure that is now beginning to give way. You did not feel it accumulating because you were occupied with managing the surface. But underneath, the forces of genuine transformation were gathering. Before we examine the 3 warning signs that indicate this process is nearing the surface, Jung identified something that must be understood first. A way of navigating what is coming that is neither flight nor force, but something far more demanding and far more transformative than either. He called it conscious suffering, and understanding it before the warning signs will determine everything about how you move through what follows. Most people, when they feel the ground beginning to shift, instinctively reach for one of 2 responses. They either grip harder, recommitting to what is dissolving, performing their investment with renewed intensity, hoping that sufficient effort will restore the meaning and stability that have begun withdrawing, or they discharge the pressure through impulsive and often destructive action, quitting, leaving, ending, blowing up the structure so the discomfort of watching it slowly dissolve is replaced by the temporary relief of having made the decision themselves. Jung watched both of these responses with considerable concern because both of them, for different reasons, prevent the transformation from completing. Conscious suffering is the third possibility, and it is the one almost nobody naturally chooses because it is the most genuinely difficult. It is the willingness to remain present with the full discomfort of transformation without attempting to fix it, flee from it, or force it to resolve according to any particular timeline. To stay in the space between who you were and who you are becoming without demanding that the process accelerate or decelerate to match the tolerance of your anxiety, to allow the old identity to loosen its grip without immediately reaching for a replacement. To sit with the disorientation of belonging nowhere and fitting nothing, because this is precisely the space in which genuine psychological transformation does its most essential work, not in the dramatic moments of visible rupture, in the unbearable and largely invisible waiting that precedes them. Let's quote. Leave the number 111 in the comments. In the symbolic and psychological framework that Jung developed across his lifetime, 111 represents the first genuine awakening to the reality of what is actually happening within you. The specific moment when a person stops misreading their own transformation as malfunction and begins recognizing it as the most intelligent process their psyche has ever initiated. If the concept of conscious suffering is naming something you have been experiencing without language for it, 111 is your signal. Leave it here. The first warning sign that the underground reorganization is reaching the surface is what Jung called the collapse of tolerance. You find yourself suddenly unable to endure things you have been patiently accommodating for years, sometimes for most of your adult life. The friend whose conversations have always revolved entirely around themselves. The family system in which your designated role has been to absorb everyone else's anxiety while your own needs remain perpetually secondary. The professional environment where you perform enthusiasm you have not genuinely felt in months or perhaps years. The intimate relationship in which you have been contracting yourself progressively to avoid the conflict that honest expression would generate. One day, without any particular precipitating event, without any obvious reason for the shift, the tolerance simply evaporates. And in its place is a clarity so stark and so immediate that it startles you. This is not irritability or burnout or a bad week compounding into a bad month. The distinction matters enormously. This is your psyche communicating with unusual directness that the internal equation has shifted. That the cost of maintaining these arrangements now exceeds, in the unconscious accounting that the self is continuously running, the cost of disrupting them. The underground reorganization has reached the surface, and your sudden, apparently disproportionate intolerance for what you have long endured is its first visible expression. The collapse of tolerance is also one of the most frequently mismanaged of the three warning signs because it arrives with a quality of urgency that makes premature action feel not just tempting, but necessary and justified. And this is precisely the moment to remember conscious suffering. To feel the full force of what is shifting without immediately translating it into action. The clarity is real, the intolerance is genuine and appropriate, but the timing of how you respond to it matters enormously for what the transformation is able to accomplish. The second warning sign is what Jung called the loss of meaning, and it carries a quality that distinguishes it immediately from ordinary depression or disillusionment, though it is frequently mistaken for both. Things that have occupied the center of your life, that have structured your sense of purpose and organized your daily investment of energy, begin losing their pull. Not in the dark, heavy way of depression where everything feels burdensome and effortful. In a strange, detached way where you look directly at what has defined your existence and feel nothing. The promotion that arrived after years of striving produces emptiness rather than satisfaction. The relationship that has been central to your identity begins feeling like observing someone else's story from a polite distance. Hobbies, friendships, and routines that once gave your days genuine texture become, without warning, unbearably tedious. Leave the number 444 in the comments. So, 44 in the comments. In the symbolic language that informed Jung's understanding of psychological transformation, 444 represents the stable but invisible interior reorganization, the specific quality of deep underground preparation that is occurring when meaning withdraws from the surface structures of a life in order to gather itself for what is coming next. If the loss of meaning you have been experiencing resonates as something deeper and stranger than ordinary dissatisfaction, 444 marks that recognition. Leave it here. What makes this second warning sign so disorienting is that you are not sad about the withdrawal of meaning. You are bewildered by it. You can observe the absence with a strange equanimity that feels almost more disturbing than grief would. Jung's explanation for this is one of the most useful and most immediately relieving insights in his entire body of work. Meaning does not disappear. It withdraws. When the psyche is preparing for fundamental transformation, it pulls its available energy away from the structures it has been maintaining. The goals, the relationships, the habitual ways of engaging with existence in the same way that blood retreats from the extremities to protect the vital organs during physiological crisis. The things that are losing meaning are not being destroyed. They are being disinvested. Your psyche is reclaiming the energy it had distributed across the architecture of your existing life because it requires that energy for what it is building next. The emptiness is not loss. It is reallocation. Something within you is gathering its full resources for a reorganization of considerable magnitude. The third warning sign is the intensification of the dream life. Jung regarded dreams with a seriousness and a precision that most contemporary psychology has largely abandoned. And for reasons that become unmistakably clear when you understand his framework, he considered them direct transmissions from the unconscious to the conscious mind. Communications from the vast and largely invisible intelligence of the psyche to the narrow and frequently overconfident awareness of the ego. And he found with a consistency across his patients that he regarded as one of his most significant clinical observations, that before major life transformations, the dream life undergoes a fundamental shift. It becomes vivid in ways that ordinary dreaming rarely achieves. Disturbing in ways that refuse to be dismissed or forgotten, impossible to categorize as simply the neural processing of daily experience. Dreams of natural catastrophe, earthquakes, floods, fires that carry strangely little fear alongside their obvious destruction. Dreams of finding previously unknown rooms in a familiar house. Rooms that feel significant beyond what their content alone would explain. Dreams of death that arrive not with terror, but with a peculiar and unsettling peace. Dreams of enormous bodies of water, oceans rising. Rivers flooding their banks, landscapes transformed by forces that dwarf any human capacity to contain them. These are not random productions of a resting nervous system. They are the unconscious speaking in the only language available to it. The symbolic language of image and emotion, about a reorganization of the inner world so significant that the outer world will inevitably be required to follow. Leave the number 528 in the comments. In the vibrational and symbolic framework that builds on the archetypal language, Jung developed 528 represents the specific frequency of genuine interior transformation. The resonance of a psyche that is already at depths below conscious awareness committed to a reorganization of fundamental magnitude. If your dream life has recently acquired the vivid, disturbing, impossible to dismiss quality being described here, 528 is your signal. Leave it here. Now we arrive at the two catastrophic mistakes that Jung documented with particular urgency. The two ways that people most reliably destroy or derail the transformation that the three warning signs are announcing. Understanding both of them is not merely intellectually useful. It may be the most practically consequential thing you take from everything shared here. The first catastrophic mistake is premature action. The pressure of transformation builds to a point where the discomfort of containing it exceeds what feels tolerable. And the person releases that pressure by making sweeping and often irreversible changes to their external circumstances. They abandon the career without any genuine clarity about what should replace it. They terminate the relationship in a state of acute distress rather than genuine discernment. American. They make declarations, issue ultimatums, pursue dramatic exits that feel in the immediate moment of their execution like liberation. And they are, but only temporarily. Because what Jung observed in the aftermath of premature action was one of the most frustrating patterns in the entire territory of psychological transformation. The person changed their external circumstances completely. But because the internal work that the transformation required was never allowed to complete, because the energy of change was discharged through external drama rather than being permitted to do its genuine interior labor, they found themselves within a year or two having rebuilt the identical patterns in an entirely different setting, different relationship, different career, different city, same prison. Because the transformation never actually happened, they escape the pressure without moving through it. The second catastrophic mistake is resistance. And it operates in the opposite direction, but produces equally damaging results. The person senses the ground shifting, and rather than moving with the movement, grips harder. They recommit to the relationship that their psyche has already begun disinvesting from. They intensify their investment in the career that has been losing its ability to hold their genuine energy. They perform their old roles with renewed and increasingly frantic vigor, hoping that if the performance is sufficiently convincing and sufficiently sustained, the meaning will return and the pressure will subside. It will not. You cannot reinvest energy into structures your psyche has already determined you have outgrown. The transformation cannot be prevented, only delayed. And what resistance produces in Jung's clinical observation is not the preservation of the existing life, but the guarantee that when the transformation finally occurs, it will be considerably more violent and considerably more total than it would have been had conscious cooperation been offered. When the first warning signs appeared, between these two failures, the premature discharge of pressure through impulsive action and the futile attempt to hold in place what the psyche has already decided to release, lies the path Jung advocated with such consistency: conscious suffering. The willingness to remain fully present with the full weight of what is shifting without reaching for either the relief of discharge or the false comfort of resistance. To inhabit the space between the old self and the new self, that disorienting belonging nowhere, fitting nothing space with as much awareness and as much patience as you can genuinely bring to it. Because it is in that specific and genuinely uncomfortable space that the real transformation completes itself. What emerges from this process when conscious suffering is genuinely practiced rather than merely intellectually acknowledged is not simply a better or more functional version of the old self. Jung was explicit and emphatic about this. It is something qualitatively different. He called it the birth of the true personality, the version of you that existed before socialization and trauma, and the accumulated adaptations of decades buried it beneath what the world required you to be. The version your entire life has been at some level far below conscious awareness, oriented toward, even when your conscious choices were moving in the opposite direction. The first quality that distinguishes this emerged personality is shadow integration. Before genuine transformation, most people navigate their existence from a carefully curated and heavily edited version of themselves. The acceptable dimensions are on display: the generosity, the competence, the agreeableness, the qualities that earned approval and belonging. The unacceptable dimensions, the anger, the ambition, the darkness, the raw and complicated capacities that did not fit the roles that others needed you to inhabit, were pushed into the unconscious. And from the unconscious, as Jung documented with relentless clinical precision, they continued operating, causing exactly the kind of havoc that unconscious material always causes when it has been denied the dignity of conscious acknowledgement. After genuine transformation, these rejected dimensions have been encountered directly and integrated honestly. The person is no longer performing goodness. They are whole. And wholeness means access to the full range of human capacity. The ability to be gentle and fierce, generous and clearly boundaried, compassionate and ruthlessness when ruthlessness is what genuine care requires. The second quality is what Jung called psychological sovereignty. The person who has moved through genuine transformation stops organizing their interior life around other people's approval, expectations, and comfort. Not through rebellion or deliberate rejection, but because the transformation burned away the part of them that had been convinced their worth depended on external validation. They can still love deeply. They can still connect genuinely, but they no longer contort themselves into configurations designed to make others more comfortable at the expense of their own authenticity. The need to be liked, to be included, to be approved of, which had been one of the most powerful organizing forces in their psychology, has been replaced by something considerably more solid, a relationship with themselves that requires no external permission to sustain. The third quality, and the one that tends to arrive last but carry the greatest weight, is what Jung described as alignment with fate. Not fate in any predetermined or mystical sense, but the direct and experiential recognition that your life has been following a trajectory that your conscious mind did not design. That there is an intelligence operating through your choices, your wounds, your losses, your seemingly random encounters, that has been orienting you towards something specific all along. After genuine transformation, people typically look back at the entirety of their experience and encounter the pattern for what may be the first time with genuine clarity. The suffering was not arbitrary. The detours were not mistakes. The things that felt most like they were destroying, you were actually dismantling the false structures that stood between you and the life that is actually yours. Jung expressed this with characteristic directness. Sudden transformation feels like destruction while it is occurring and looks like destiny in retrospect. Because while you are inside it, all you can perceive is what is being lost. But once you have passed through it, what becomes visible is that everything that fell away needed to fall away, and that the intelligence of the psyche was not destroying your life. It was clearing the space for the life that was actually waiting for you. Subscribe to Carl Jung philosophy and continue this journey with us. Because Jung was genuinely honest about one final dimension of this process that most people who discuss his work consistently underemphasize. The timing of transformation belongs entirely to the psyche. It cannot be accelerated because the discomfort of waiting has become intolerable. And it cannot be slowed because the prospect of what lies on the other side generates genuine fear. The unconscious has its own intelligence and its own calendar. Your role is not to direct the process. Your role is to remain conscious while it occurs, to witness what is dissolving without clinging to it with the desperation of someone who does not yet trust what the dissolution is making space for. To feel the genuine grief of releasing what has been central to your identity without allowing that grief to pull you backward into what your psyche has already decided you have outgrown. The people who are transformed by this process, rather than simply damaged by the pressure of it, share one quality that Jung returned to again and again across his decades of clinical observation. They trust the intelligence of the psyche more than they trust the fear of the ego. Not blindly, not passively, but with a grounded and increasingly hard-won recognition that the pressure they feel has genuine purpose, that what is dissolving needed to dissolve, that what emerges on the other side will be more real, more complete, and more genuinely alive than anything the old self, however competent and however carefully maintained, could have constructed from its limited vantage point. Leave the number 777 in the comments. In the symbolic language of quantum consciousness and the deep archetypal framework that informed Jung's entire understanding of the relationship between individual psychological development and the collective journey of human consciousness, 777 represents the alignment of individual awareness with the transformative intelligence of the self. The specific resonance of someone who has stopped fighting the process their own psyche has initiated and begun, with genuine courage and genuine trust, to let it carry them toward what they have always been becoming. Clears throat. If what has been shared here has named something you have been feeling without adequate language for it, if something in this exploration has confirmed what some deeper part of you has already been quietly registering, 777 is your declaration. Leave it here, be your best here. The transformation that is approaching is not happening to you. It is happening through you, and what it is building on the other side of everything it is currently requiring you to release is the most real and the most genuinely yours version of the life you have been at every level of your being always moving toward. Before we close, I want to speak directly to the person who is in the middle of this right now, not approaching it, not reflecting on it from the other side, actually inside it, in that disorienting, belonging nowhere space where the old identity has already begun loosening and the new one has not yet made itself visible enough to trust. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Carl Jung. This is not a statement designed to romanticize suffering or to suggest that difficulty is inherently meaningful. It is a clinical observation from someone who watched thousands of human beings move through exactly what you are moving through right now, for it now. And what he observed without exception was this. The people who came through it, who did not merely survive the pressure, but were genuinely transformed by it, were not the ones who suffered least. They were the ones who suffered most consciously, who stayed present with what was dissolving rather than fleeing into distraction or forcing resolution before the process had completed its necessary work. What you resist persists. What you accept transforms. Carl Jung, the dissolution you are experiencing is not evidence of weakness. It is not evidence that you made wrong choices or built your life incorrectly or are fundamentally less resilient than the people around you who appear to be navigating their existence without this kind of interior upheaval. It is evidence that something in you has grown large enough to require more space than the existing structures of your life can provide. The old container is not failing. It is simply no longer the right size for what you have become. The most dangerous thing of all is to leap into the unknown without adequate preparation. But the second most dangerous is to never leap at all. Carl Jung, you are being prepared right now, in the discomfort and the disorientation and the strange grief of releasing what you have outgrown. Untrue. Every moment of conscious presence within this process gasps and sighs. Every moment you choose awareness over numbing, genuine feeling over performed stability, is preparation not for a return to what was, for the arrival of what has always been waiting for you on the other side of who you thought you were required to be. Trust the process more than you trust the fear. The psyche knows what it is doing. It always has. Jung spent decades watching people break and watching people become. And the one thing that separated those two outcomes was never talent, never luck, never circumstance. It was this, the willingness to stay conscious while everything familiar dissolved, not to run, not to force, just to remain, and to trust that the intelligence behind the pressure knows exactly what it's doing. You are not falling apart. You are being rebuilt. And the version of you on the other side of this, the one that doesn't need permission, doesn't need approval, doesn't need to shrink, has been waiting your entire life for you to stop mistaking this moment for destruction. It was never destruction. It was always the beginning. If this found you at the right time, you already know why. Like, subscribe, and stay on this path. The next video goes even deeper.